The sound of thunder rumbled through the dense forest, shaking the windows of the small cabin where I had spent the better part of the evening. Rain hammered relentlessly against the roof, creating a rhythm that filled the silence I had grown so accustomed to. I had retreated to the cabin for peace, a break from the chaos of daily life, but the knock on the door shattered any illusion of solitude. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the knock came again, louder, more insistent. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door before pulling it open to reveal him. "Evan?" I said, barely recognizing my own voice over the storm. There he stood, soaked to the bone, his dark curls plastered to his forehead, his leather jacket doing little to shield him from the downpour. His green eyes, piercing even in the dim light, locked onto mine, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "Hey, Ben." His voice was quiet, almost uncertain, and it tugged at something deep inside me. I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside, motioning him in, and he entered with a hesitance I didn't remember from the last time we saw each other, years ago, at a family gathering where we barely exchanged more than a few polite words. The distance between us had been palpable then, though neither of us had acknowledged it. As he shrugged off his wet jacket, I caught the faintest scent of his cologne, something woody and familiar that sent a pang of nostalgia through me. He looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furniture and the fire crackling in the hearth. "Nice place," he said, his tone casual, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed and unflexed at his sides. "Thanks," I replied, still trying to process his presence. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I was in the area, and I guess I just needed to see you." Something in his voice made my chest tighten, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Well, you're here now. Let me get you something dry to wear." I rummaged through the small wardrobe in the corner, finding an old sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants that I hadn't worn in years. When I turned back, Evan was standing by the fire, his wet shirt clinging to his body and revealing the lean, athletic frame I remembered from when we used to spend summers swimming in the lake near our grandparents' house. "Here," I said, holding out the clothes. Our fingers brushed as he took them, and the contact was so fleeting, so innocent, that it shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. It always did. Evan murmured a soft, "Thanks," before disappearing into the small bathroom to change. I stood by the fire trying to shake off the sudden tension that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. The storm outside was relentless, but the real chaos was inside, raging in my chest, pounding in my temples. It had been years since I'd seen him, years since those endless summers at the lake, since we'd stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, since we'd drifted apart without a proper goodbye. He had been my closest friend, my confidant, I didn't even know what to call him anymore. But the unspoken weight of what had gone unsaid between us lingered like the scent of rain in the air. When he came back out, wearing my too big sweatshirt and sweatpants, he looked more like the Evan I remembered, relaxed, at ease, with that faintly crooked smile that had always disarmed me. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the edges, and the firelight cast warm shadows across his face, making him look almost otherworldly. "This brings back memories," he said, gesturing to the clothes as he sat down on the couch. "Feels like something you would have handed me after I fell into the lake or something." I chuckled softly, settling into the armchair across from him. "Yeah, except back then you'd insist you didn't need them and would walk around soaking wet like an idiot." He grinned, and for a moment the years melted away. It was like we were kids again, sitting by the fire after a long day, teasing each other and sharing secrets we wouldn't dare tell anyone else. But there was something different now, something heavier. The silence between us wasn't the comfortable kind we used to share. It was charged, filled with words we didn't know how to say. "Why now, Evan?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Why come here tonight?" His smile faded, replaced by a look I couldn't quite read. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. I don't know, he admitted, his voice quiet. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About us. The word hung in the air like a spark, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Us? He nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. Yeah, we used to be close, right? Like really close. And then, I don't know, things just got complicated. Complicated. It was the perfect word and yet completely inadequate. Things had gotten complicated, so much so that neither of us had known how to handle it. The way we'd looked at each other for too long, the way our conversations had shifted from playful to something deeper, the way the air between us had always felt just a little too charged. It had all built up until it became too much, and we drifted apart because neither of us had been brave enough to face it. Yeah, I said softly. They did. Evan looked at me then, his green eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or longing, or some mix of the two. I missed you, he said simply, and I guess I just couldn't ignore it anymore. My chest tightened and I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. I missed you too, I admitted, the words feeling heavier than they should have. But I didn't know if you wanted to hear from me. He let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. I thought the same thing about you. I guess we're both idiots, huh? I smiled faintly, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I didn't know how to navigate it. I wanted to ask him why he'd really come, why he'd waited until now to say these things, but I was afraid of what his answer might be. I've been thinking a lot about that last summer, he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. The one before I left for college. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Of course, he'd bring up that summer, the summer everything had changed, the summer we'd spent almost every waking moment together, the summer of long nights and stolen glances, the summer of almosts and what-ifs. What about it? I asked cautiously, my heart pounding. He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of the sweatshirt. I can't stop wondering if I should have said something. If things would have been different if I'd just been honest with you. I felt my pulse quicken, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. Honest about what? He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might back down. But then he took a deep breath and said the words that changed everything. About how I felt. About how I feel. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the weight of his confession. He wasn't just talking about friendship. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his hands trembled slightly, in the way his voice had cracked on the last word. Evan, I started, but he cut me off. I know, he said quickly, his voice full of emotion. I know it's probably too late, and I know this is complicated. But I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that I don't feel something every time I think about you. I stared at him, my chest tight, my mind racing. This was Evan, my cousin, my closest friend, the person who had been a constant in my life until he wasn't. And now he was sitting here, telling me he felt something more, something I'd buried so deep I wasn't sure I could face it. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, he said, his gaze never leaving mine. I needed you to know. And if you don't feel the same, I'll walk out that door right now and we can pretend this never happened. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I realized with startling clarity that I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want to pretend this never happened. Because the truth was, I felt it too. I always had. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady as I crossed the room to where he was sitting. His eyes followed me, his expression a mix of hope and fear, and when I stopped in front of him I could see the way his breath hitched. I do feel the same, I said, my voice trembling but sure. I don't know how to handle it. Evan stood then, closing the small distance between us, his hands hesitating at his sides before settling gently on my shoulders. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, his voice full of quiet conviction. "Together." And then he kissed me. The kiss was hesitant at first, as if he was testing the waters, giving me the chance to pull away if I wanted to. But I didn't. My hands found their way to his waist, gripping the fabric of the sweatshirt he was wearing as I leaned into him. His lips were soft, warm, and familiar in a way that felt almost impossible. My chest tightened, a swirl of emotions I couldn't fully process rushing to the surface all at once: relief, fear, longing. Evan's hands slid up from my shoulders to cup my face, his touch firm but gentle, as if he was afraid I might shatter under his fingers. It was grounding, steadying, and I felt myself relax into it, the tension in my body melting away. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background, the sound of the rain and thunder replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of our breathing. When we finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath warm against my lips. His eyes searched mine, his expression a mix of vulnerability and something deeper, something I couldn't quite name but felt all the same. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I'd ever get the chance." I swallowed hard, my chest tight with the weight of his words. "Why didn't you say anything back then?" I asked, my voice trembling. He let out a soft, humorless laugh, his hands falling to his sides. "Because I was scared. Scared of what it meant, of how you might react, of what it could change between us. And then I left, and it just felt too late." "It wasn't," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "It never was." He looked at me then, his eyes shining with something I couldn't quite place. Hope, maybe, or relief. "I didn't think you'd feel the same," he said softly. "I thought I was alone in this." "You weren't," I admitted, the words coming out quieter than I intended. "But I was scared too. And when you left, I thought it was better to let it go." Evan shook his head, his expression full of regret. "I should have told you. I should have stayed." "It doesn't matter now," I said, reaching out to take his hand in mine. "You're here. That's what matters." The silence between us was heavy but not uncomfortable, the air charged with everything we'd left unsaid over the years. His thumb brushed against the back of my hand, the small, intimate gesture sending a shiver down my spine. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, the intensity of it almost overwhelming, and yet I couldn't bring myself to look away. "Ben," he said softly, my name on his lips like a prayer. "Are you sure about this? About us?" I nodded, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and certainty. "I don't know what this means, but I'm sure about you." A small, tentative smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he squeezed my hand gently. "That's all I need to hear." He pulled me into him again, his arms wrapping around me in a way that felt protective and grounding all at once. I rested my head against his shoulder, the warmth of his body seeping into mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, the storm outside finally beginning to calm as the night stretched on. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room, and the tension between us began to shift into something softer, something that felt more like peace. Evan pulled back slightly, his hand still resting on my waist as he looked down at me. "I don't want this to just be tonight," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I want more than that. I want to try." His words sent a wave of warmth through me, and I felt myself nodding before I even realized it. "Me too," I said, my voice trembling but sure. "I want to try too." His smile widened and he leaned down to press a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly, his voice full of quiet conviction. "Together." The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet conversation and stolen touches, the kind of moments that felt both ordinary and extraordinary all at once. We talked about the past, about the things we'd been too afraid to say back then, and about the future we wanted to build together. And as the hours ticked by, the weight of the years we'd spent apart began to lift, replaced by a tentative but unshakable hope. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, we were lying on the couch together, his arm draped over me and my head resting on his chest. The sound of his heartbeat was steady and reassuring, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. "I'm glad you knocked on my door," I said softly, my voice barely audible. "Me too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "I'll never stop being glad." As I closed my eyes, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing lull me to sleep, I knew that this was only the beginning. There were still so many questions, so many unknowns, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because we would face it together. The cabin was bathed in the soft light of early dawn. The storm finally dissipated, leaving only the faint sound of dripping rainwater from the roof. Evan's arm was still draped over me, his warmth anchoring me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. His fingers traced lazy, absent patterns on my shoulder, a small, intimate gesture that felt more grounding than any words could have been. Neither of us had slept much, but the quiet between us wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, filled with the kind of understanding that didn't require explanation. I shifted slightly, tilting my head up to look at him. His eyes were already on me, soft and unguarded in a way I rarely saw, and the vulnerability there made my chest tighten. "You're staring," I teased gently, though my voice came out softer than I intended. He smiled, the corners of his mouth tugging upward in a way that made my heart ache. "Can you blame me?" he asked, his tone light but laced with something deeper. "I still can't believe this is real." I reached up, my fingers brushing against his jaw, and his smile faltered slightly, replaced by something raw and unspoken. "It is," I said quietly. "It's real." For a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of the night still lingering between us but softened now by the first rays of sunlight filtering through the window. There was so much I wanted to say, so many thoughts and emotions fighting for space in my mind, but none of it felt urgent. What mattered was this: him, here, now. "I don't want to lose this," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. "We've already wasted so much time. I don't want to waste any more." His eyes searched mine, as if looking for any hint of doubt, and when he didn't find it, he leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. "Not this time." The promise in his voice made my chest ache, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it. Evan reached up, his thumb brushing it away, and the tenderness in the gesture made it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about the kiss, or the night we'd shared. It was about everything we'd been too afraid to say, everything we'd lost and found again. "I mean it," he said softly, his thumb still resting against my cheek. "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm all in. As long as you are." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and he smiled, a soft, almost shy expression that made my heart flutter. "Good," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "because I don't think I could let you go now, even if I tried." We stayed like that for a while, the world outside slowly waking up as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The storm had washed everything clean, and the air smelled fresh, carrying with it the promise of something new. It felt fitting in a way, like the universe was giving us a second chance, a chance to do this right. Eventually, Evan shifted, his hand sliding down to rest on mine. "We should probably get some sleep," he said, though there was no urgency in his tone. "Unless you want to start the day completely exhausted." I laughed softly, the sound easing some of the tension still lingering in my chest. "You say that like it's not already too late." He grinned, leaning down to press a quick kiss to my forehead before settling back against the couch. Fair point. As I lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm settle over me. There were still so many questions, so many uncertainties, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of his presence lull me into a light, dreamless sleep, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.